This is the camera that you've been waiting for. Finally, we have the Sony A7S III. It's finally here. After almost 5 years since its predecessor, Sony has clearly put a lot into this new model. I can see why it was a 5-year wait. We've got new menus that are, they're touch-enabled. We've got new file formats for both stills and video. We've got 4K up to 120 frames a second, raw output, new heat management, simultaneous recording internally and externally, 2 dual-function card slots. There's a lot to unpack here, but I'm really excited to share with you guys today the brand new Sony A7S III. So a quick note here, I'm actually using the Sony A7S III to film this because the S originally stood for sensitivity. It also has an incredible range of video features here, and it does really well in low light, so I decided to reorganize my studio configuration for this video and take advantage of the low light possibilities in the Sony A7S III. The original intention of the S series, the S stood for sensitivity. So what this meant is a lower megapixel configuration on the sensor, which would give you better sensitivity in low light. Now, the original A7S also had pretty good video capabilities as well. It would shoot 4K externally, you got 1080 internal, it all looked really good. People started using that camera and its successor for the video functions. What's interesting is most camera companies do not break from the original intention, and I think in this case with the A7S III, this is the first time that we've seen a camera company, in other words Sony, that's taken something and allowed it to adapt to what people want to use it for, and I think that is actually pretty key. So this is still a great sensitivity camera in terms of stills and low light, but we also have phenomenal video capabilities. We can go all the way up to 120p, we can shoot 10-bit 422 internal and external, and we can shoot both at the same time, and the external signal can even be raw video. It's really impressive what they've done with this. So let's actually start with the new menu system. This is something that Sony users have been asking for, well, actually pretty much forever, and we finally have it. The new menu is a split screen based interface, so you can see all of the options that are in each folder without having to navigate in and out of submenus, and this can all be accessed via touch finally, and there is touch and hold functions so that you can see what each category is before selecting. Touch also works in the function menus, and that's really nice because these are accessible while you are recording both internally and externally. You can also see that this camera has a fully articulating flip screen as well, so the new menus and the new layout just make way more sense than they've ever done before. This is a fairly in-depth topic here because they've been completely overhauled, so I've actually done a second video just dedicated to the new menu structure. So I will link that in the description below this video, so make sure you check that out. But I do want to point out that one of my favorite changes in here is that we have differences now between stills mode and movie mode, and now we can choose what settings to change when switching between those two modes. It used to be you just had kind of one mode in the camera. If you switched to video, it just brought over all the settings from shooting stills, and so this means now that you have two completely, truly dedicated independent modes for this camera, and they are customizable. So a lot of the buzz around the A7S III is clearly around video, but there is actually some great functionality for still shooters as well for those of you who want to shoot in low light and get excellent performance. 12 megapixels, I know, it doesn't sound very high in today's megapixel race. Believe me, this is still plenty big to get great looking images. You can do prints up to 11 by 17, no problem. And so the benefit for using this kind of sensor at 12 megapixels is going to be low light performance. So you get a better pixel pitch because you have a much less crowded sensor, which is going to give you a better signal to noise ratio. So the noise part of that equation is going to be the same whether it's a high megapixel or a low megapixel count, but the signal gets a boost because you have more room on the sensor, which allows you to get much cleaner performance. Low light performance at high ISO settings is absolutely outstanding. Compared to the previous versions of this camera, you're going to get even better performance, and it has really nice contrast even when you're really pushing this camera into high territory. So another favorite of mine is there are now 759 phase detection autofocus points with a 92% area coverage of the frame. We didn't have phase detection autofocus in previous versions of the A7S. We finally got it. It's a really welcome addition. Of course, this is also compatible with the latest generation of Sony autofocus that you're going to find on the A9 with flexible spot tracking, object recognition, and of course you have both human and animal IAF. This is interesting too. On the front of the camera, we've got both visible light light and IR sensors. And what these do is they're going to improve white balance accuracy in artificial light, and we have a new capture format as well for stills mode. So on any Sony camera, we've always had the ability to shoot RAW, JPEG, or both RAW and JPEG at the same time. We also have a new file format, which is an HEIF. That stands for High Efficiency Image Format, and this is something that you see in a lot of mobile phones now. It's different than JPEG because you're going to have a more efficient or smaller file, but what's interesting about these HEIF files is they actually record in HLG, so you can select either 422 or 420, and as long as you have something where you can view that color space, they are also BT 2020, so we're talking about HDR, and there's a lot of really interesting edit possibilities. At the time I'm filming this, Imaging Edge is the only thing that will see these. I had trouble with anything else, and what's interesting is I actually could open them on my Mac in the Finder. You could even preview the file by hitting the spacebar. Couldn't get them to open in anything else. Photoshop would crash, Photos would crash, Lightroom wouldn't even bring them in. So this is kind of a work in progress, so it's more forward-thinking than Sony have been in the past, and I think it's kind of a cool addition to have on there. Also impressive is the 5-axis in-body image stabilization, which is now going to give you a 5.5-step compensation. You can shoot up to 10 frames continuous with either mechanical or electronic shutter. This isn't the stack sensor from the A9 cameras, so we're not going to get the 20 frames per second, but it's still a decent speed. And what's interesting is you can now get up to 1000 RAW plus JPEG frame capacity in the buffer, so there's a lot of performance. And the autofocus performance is going to be accurate down to -6 EV, so you're going to get really good autofocus in very low light. This is probably a good time to mention that in the month of August, I am going to be doing a camera giveaway, and if you want more information, I will put a link in the description below. When you go to that link, you will have a way to sign up. It's just a random drawing, and I'm giving away basically a $4,000 budget of the camera and or lens combination of your choice. So if you want to get an A7S III, this is a great time to do it. Now, there are a couple ways of increasing your odds of winning if you own my preset packs. So if you haven't bought them, I have links in there. These are preset packs. You're seeing them in this video I'm using on various images. Some of them are straight out of camera. Some of them I did some edits on. These are presets that I use on a regular basis. I have designed them to work in both Lightroom and Capture One. And if you buy presets, you can increase your odds of winning. You don't have to, of course. You can just enter the giveaway as is, but it's a great way to support the channel. And I thought that 2020 is kind of a dud year, so why don't we make the summer a little bit more awesome than usual? So I thought it'd be a great time to do a giveaway, so check it out. So let's go ahead and talk about the star of the show, which most of you are waiting to hear. Let's go ahead and talk about video. So the A7S III gives you 4K, full pixel readout with no bending in all modes, and you're going to get this up to 120 frames per second. This is also finally the camera that Sony gives us 10-bit depth with 422 color sampling for internal recording, and the quality is excellent. The files are gorgeous, and the move to 10-bit gives you files that you're really going to get a lot of flexibility with in post-production, which are going to give you a much higher latitude for color grading and exposure adjustment. So one of the challenges is when, particularly if you're shooting in low light, with digital video, noise tends to hide in shadows, and typically when you have an 8-bit depth on your file, you're not going to get a whole lot of latitude to recover any shadow detail information in, but with 10-bit, it's clearly possible now. If you shoot an S-Log3, you're going to see probably the biggest difference. If I toggle this on and off, you're going to see that I can actually grade it, and I can actually recover quite a bit of shadow detail, so it's really nice to have. Sony says that in S-Log3, you're going to get over 15 stops of dynamic range to work with, and it also works down to 160 ISO, and this is way more versatile than the higher ISO minimums that we've traditionally had in Sony cameras, so 160 ISO makes this way more versatile. Image stabilization is probably the best that I have seen on any Sony camera. We now have active available in 4K, but it actually seems much improved over other cameras that have done this before. So there's two image stabilization modes. You have standard and you have active. There's no crop in 4K on this camera when you have it off or in standard. Active mode does use a slight crop because it's actually doing a lot more to stabilize your video. I assign this to a function key so that I can switch it up. If I'm on a tripod, I can turn it off. The micro jitters seem to be pretty even stand out on this, and I'm finding that I can handheld this even with longer lenses. It works absolutely fantastically. It also gets a boost, obviously, if you're using a lens that supports optical image stabilization, such as the 100 to 400 millimeter G Master, or even the 100 millimeter G Master, which is a little bit older but very underappreciated. This is one of my favorite Sony lenses. There are two new variants on the XAVC-S codecs. Up to now, the standard was one that just supported long GOP, or group of pictures, but we now have XAVC-HS, which is an H.265 file, and also XAVC-SI, which is your all-intra format. So what are these crazy terms that you're using, you might be wondering? Well, if you're not familiar with the terms long GOP and all-intra, these are two different ways that you can interpret video footage. Obviously, video footage is a series of frames. With long GOP, it is a much more efficient format. It's easy on your computer when you're editing. If you don't know what you've been shooting in, it's probably long GOP. And GOP, or GOP, stands for Group of Pictures. And so what it does is it has an intra frame, but it has these intermediary frames that aren't rendered at quite as high a resolution. Basically, the video is done in a way where your eye will see it as final video, but you are not noticing that you're missing stuff in those details. So that's the way the long GOP works. All intra is the opposite of that. That's where every frame is intra. So if you think of like movie film and where every frame is an image, and this is much more taxing on your computer, but you would want to switch over to this when you're shooting something that has a lot of motion or really high detail. So like things like falling water render really well as all intra. It's really cool to have this option in here. It is more taxing on your computer and your editor. Your fans will kick up when you're trying to edit with this, but it's a great picture in the end. I don't want to use it for everything personally, but it's there when I need it. And so this is really cool to finally have in this camera. We also now have the ability when you're shooting externally to get 16-bit raw video that is actually the full sensor readout. And you can do this at the same time you're actually recording another video format in camera. So this is pretty exceptional. If you're somebody who really wants access to raw video, this is now possible. Of course, at the time I'm recording this, I couldn't find anything that this would work on. You need an external recorder that supports it. I really like the Atomos Ninja 5, and I think that Atomos, if I had to guess, I don't know, would probably be including this in a firmware update soon, but unfortunately at the time I'm recording, I did not have a way of testing this, so that is something to come. I also would like to point out that there's a few enhancements to autofocus that we haven't seen before. So we've got 5 settings for subject shift sensitivity, and we have 7 settings for rack focus shots. So if you want to do something cinematic just by using the touchscreen, like changing the focus between 2 objects, you can set this up so you're going to see exactly how fast it's going to work, and you can really dial it in and get it just right. Now, at the heart of this camera, and the main reason that all of these new features are possible, it's the new processor. So this is a Bionz XR, which gives us up to 8 times more processing power than the previous Bionz X, and it makes a gigantic difference. So this means not only faster processing, but it means a much faster response with network and file management. You can also get improved color reproduction, a more natural gradation, faster autofocus, face detection, and a faster write speed to the card if you were using CF Express Type A memory cards. Now, I was hoping I could test this out. I just have the tough cards that Sony makes, which are pretty fast, and so I don't know that I'd even be able to measure a speed difference, but it's really interesting that they've chosen this format because it has one slot that you can fit either card into. So we have dual slots that actually take 2 different card types. So that's something that's actually very cool. It's very forward-thinking. Sony are going to be making the CF Express Type A cards. They will be available when the camera's available. I'll put pricing and stuff when I get it in the show description below. There's also a reader that you will be able to use. And there's also some other ways that you can get files in and out of the camera if you want to go over a network and get speed that way. And I'm going to talk about all that in another dedicated video that I'm going to do just to compatibility with connections. There's a lot of really cool stuff that Sony have put on this camera. It is very forward thinking, and I think that a lot of this stuff is going to come in very handy and be realized by video shooters and still photographers alike. So I will put a link to that in the show description as well. Another favorite feature of mine on this camera is the Viewfinder. So this Viewfinder is the world's first QXGA 9.44 million dot OLED EVF. So it has a 0.9x magnification and a 41-degree field of view, and it is gorgeous. This is probably the closest, and I'm going to go on a limb by saying this, but it's really better than any DSLR reflex viewfinder. This is my favorite new viewfinder on any system I've used to date. It is absolutely gorgeous. Now, you're going to get 2 options for this viewfinder. You can shrink the display for a high point. So if you shoot with eyeglasses and you can't get your eyes eye as close to the EVF as when you're not wearing glasses, you can't see everything, so it's nice to be able to just shrink this down. And you can also adjust the frame rate for better performance versus better battery life. You will get a higher frame rate at the expense of battery life, but honestly, both options are stunning. For me, it's the resolution that's really amazing. The body design on the camera is very similar to the A7R IV, but slightly deeper towards the back, and this accommodates a heat reduction design internally that does not use a fan, so you don't have any noise or moving parts. So gone are overheating issues. Finally, Sony has also lifted all recording time limits on this camera, so none of that 29.9 minute stuff where it cuts off. You can just go as long as you want. You're really only going to be limited by battery life or your recording space. So now when your kid signs up for that 15-hour Wagner opera that they're going to show at the end of the school year, you'll be able to film the whole thing no problem. There's some other new physical changes as well. We talked about the flip screen a little bit, which is quite excellent. The movie record button is no longer hard to get to. It's placed on the top of the body, basically where the C1 button was before. Everything's kind of moved over. The card slots, as I mentioned, are very unique with the double slot configuration. Connections on this camera include a full-sized HDMI port. Thank goodness, no more the little mini HDMIs that have the tendency to get bent a lot. We also have a headphone jack and a mic jack, and the Sony favorite multi-USB, as well as finally USB-C connections. This is going to give you an enormous amount of expandability to this camera. Again, I'll have a dedicated video on that, but you can power the camera, you can recharge the battery with a USB brick, you can also hook it up to an Ethernet cable with the right adapter. It's got a lot of flexibility all of a sudden by just adding that one port onto the camera. You've got multiple audio options as well, mic and headphone jacks if you want to use a Rode mic, monitor it with headphones, but Sony also makes use of its multi-interface hot shoe. This gives you options of either using the shotgun B1M that Sony released last year with the A7R IV, or you can use the XLR K3M, yes, these are their real names, audio interface. The A7S III supports 4-channel, 24-bit recording through the hot shoe. So guess what? No cables, and you actually have 48-volt phantom power for any external mic you want to use, and it just is powered through the camera. So this is pretty amazing. There's just a few little nitpicky observations that I have that would make this even better. And so first of all, hats off to Sony for delivering. I think that's one of their best cameras for low light performance, especially for video. It really is outstanding. It's one of the best pictures I've seen on any Sony camera. It's one of the best image stabilization systems that I've seen on any Sony camera. I do think it's interesting that they have taken a video-centric approach, but it would be nice to have some of the features that Panasonic has been giving us for a long time. So for instance, the ability to switch your shutter speed into shutter angle. This is something that most people, if you don't shoot a lot of video, you're probably not going to care about, but if you are a video shooter, it's nice to know that you have a 180-degree shutter angle, or if you want to vary that angle up for some reason, you don't have to calculate the math with frame rate. So that's one little thing. The other thing is, since we have video features right now, it would be great to start seeing scopes. And this is something that is nitpicky. I mean, we do have zebras, they work just fine. We have a histogram, but it would be nice to have things like a vector scope and maybe some RGB parade so you can make sure that your color balance is right in camera. These are little things that have nothing really to do inherently with the image quality per se, but they are usability issues. And I think that those small little things would make this a much more usable camera for video shooters. Another thing that is super nitpicky, and it's not just on this camera, it's on the A7R IV and some other cameras as well, but I wish that the locks on the dials that have them were consistent. It's nice to have a press on and off for your exposure compensation, but then the mode selection dial is a press and turn, and it would be nice if they were just both up and down, locked or unlocked, because sometimes you want to lock them, sometimes you don't, and it's just fiddly to be able to press that button in when you're turning. These are super nitpicky, but that's just one thing I wish were consistent. And one other thing that's not so much a complaint, it's just kind of a forward-thinking idea, but it would be to have the ability to load your own LUT files into the camera for preview. Now, we do have a gamma assist function in the camera, so if you're shooting an S-Log and you don't want to watch the washed out image, or if you have a client around and they don't get it, you can turn that on, but it would be really nice to be able to preview LUTs that are your own and be able to load those in the camera. Again, this is something that other cameras do, and it would be really great to see Sony move in this direction. So this has been a lot of information, and I hope that you've sat through it this far. I want to know what you guys think. I'm really excited about this camera. Don't forget about my giveaway. I'll put a link in the description below. I will catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.